Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Podcasting for Latina CEOs. I am your host and your coach, Heidy delacruz. And today I want to talk about why your podcast is a business. Now, again, this is for those who may choose to have their podcast as a lead generator or as an online business. But there's some people who want to have their podcast as a hobby or a passion project, and that's okay too. So I'm not talking to you today. I am talking to those who want to tie their podcast into their business and use it as a lead generator. So I want to talk about why your podcast is an online business and how you can use it to generate clients and leads into your business. And I am also talking to those who maybe didn't realize that podcasting can actually be an online business. Because, for example, when people think about online businesses, they usually think about like coaching, right? Getting on a Zoom call or memberships when they have a group of people coming on Zoom calls on a monthly basis and coaching them or talking through and working through things like that. They also think about digital marketing, right? Or digital products. They think about blogging, like all these other things with online businesses, but you also can have an online business as a podcast. Or I should say, you can also have your podcast be an online business. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. So if you are thinking of starting a podcast to tie it into your business, this is for you. So podcasting, like I have mentioned in another episode, like there is investments that you need to do for your podcast. So if you are not making money with your podcast, and currently right now it is an expense, right? Podcasting costs you time, money, and energy. And if there's no strategy behind it, again, it's an expense, it's a hobby, it is a passion project. And that's okay. If you want to have it as a passion project, again, I said that is perfectly fine. But this is for those who want to generate income from their podcast. So how is a podcast an actual online business, and how can we use it as a lead generator without feeling salesy or forced? This is something that I think I realized maybe like a year and a half into my podcasting journey that I actually did want to help other people start their own podcasts. And I did this because when I first started my immigration podcast, I had joined a lot of Facebook groups about podcasting, right? About either being a guest on podcasts or finding guests, right? So I had to market my own show and let people know that this show was available. So I did it for both things, to be able to talk about my show, but then also to find immigrants who could share their journey coming to the US on my podcast. And one of the things that kept coming up when people were just starting their podcast or wanting to figure out how to start a podcast was that they were feeling overwhelmed in the beginning because there's just so much information out there, but there wasn't a step-by-step guide like, hey, work on this first. Then after you have that, when work on this second and third, because there really isn't a first, second, third step to starting a podcast. You can start with your cover art, or you can start with outlining your episodes. You can start with naming your podcast. Like there's so many different areas of where you can start. But that's why I created the voice method so it wouldn't be overwhelming. So reverse engineering, right? What did I do first when I first started my podcast, right? So that is really what got me to wanting to help other people start their podcast. Is I just kept seeing that online. That like people were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know where to start." And it's like, well, I can help. Like I can help people start their podcast because I was there before. So how do we turn this podcast into a lead generator, right? We need to have the podcast have systems, right? Because that is ultimately what makes an online business, right? How do you get people into your ecosystem, right? So if you are a coach, you would have either a blog or, that could be used as a funnel, or you can have a landing page. You can use social media. So with your podcast is actually your funnel, right? It is your lead generator. It is where you are talking directly to your audience, and then you have them listen to you. You either share tips, your expertise, advice, or client win. So it's literally exactly what I'm doing right now is what you would do on your show to generate leads. And then at the end of the episode, you need to have a call to action. What do you want people to do at the end of the episode, right? And usually you should have one or two, because if you give them too much to do or you give them nothing to do, then they won't do anything, right? So if your episode is about a new coaching program that you are starting, then let them know like, hey, the link is in the show notes for you to apply to be in my coaching program, right? If you are releasing a new digital product and you want people to check it out, then let them know like, hey, the link to the digital product is in the show notes. So then they can go there. If you want them to leave you a review, if you want them to send questions for you to answer on the show, like whatever it is that you want people to do, you have to end it at the end of the episode with a call to action. So think of your podcast as your overall system, right? Your online system that brings people in, it helps you build that trust with your audience, and then you guide them through the next step. Again, the call to action. So as I mentioned earlier, I didn't think, when I first started my first podcast, I didn't think of it as a business. I was just literally wanting to share immigrant stories. But as time went on and I saw the need, then my mindset shifted to like, okay, how can I make money from this? And now the podcast has grown so much that it has helped with my visibility. It's helped with gaining trust with my audience. And also it has created opportunities for me, which actually is in my next episode, what opportunities my podcast has brought for me, which I'm going to leave for the next episode. But I'm so passionate about this because I want the same thing for you. Podcasting is a global stage. So like I've mentioned before, my first podcast is being listened to in over 20 countries. And this one is now being listened to in 5 different countries. So as time goes on, the reach will expand and more people will be able to listen and start a podcast all over the world, right? So since I help people online start their podcast, I can literally help people in all countries to start their podcasts, right? And that is the power of podcasting and also just the power of having an online business. So here are a few benefits of having a podcast as an online business. Like I have mentioned before, social media, those posts are not pushed after 24 hours, but your episodes on your podcast are evergreen, meaning that people can listen to your episodes months and years down the line. So, for example, last week I had someone binge listen to my podcast. And again, my podcast started back in August. We are now in February. That is 6 months. So they are listening to episodes that I published 6 months ago. And actually, I have the podcast episode about podcast SEO. So whenever people have any questions about podcast SEO, it's like, hey, I have a podcast episode about that. So go ahead and listen to there and learn. And if you have any further questions or you want to schedule a one-on-one call with me, here's the link, right? And when I see people ask online, like, where do I start a podcast? You know what I do? I send them the episode on starting with the voice method because it literally walks you through the steps that you need to start a podcast. So these are different ways that you can use these podcast episodes to generate leads for your business. So think of like the top 10 questions that you get asked all the time in your business. And I know that you are tired of answering these questions over and over and over again. Do a podcast episode. So then that way, when someone has that question, you can send them the podcast episode. And then if they need, strategy or they need a roadmap or they need to go a deeper dive with you, like those pick my brain sessions, then you can go ahead and send them your one-on-one call link. Another thing to think about when it comes to podcast episodes and its evergreen content is that with podcast SEO, like I talked about in the other episode, people can find your podcast on Google, on podcast platforms, and on YouTube, and actually even in AI, because it all ties into together. So I've had a few people already tell me or reach out to me because they found my first show about immigration because AI suggested it to them. So I just think that is so cool. They were looking for podcasts or storytelling, or they were look at something in regards to the immigration space, right? And my podcast was suggested by AI. Again, that is SEO, that is Google, that is intentionally putting keywords into show notes and the episode titles and things like that to be able to show up when people are looking for what you are answering. This also means that the podcast is working for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So even if there are days or weeks that you don't feel like showing up, like life is happening, crazy things are going on, but your podcast is still there running and working for you in the back end. So other things to think about of like having your podcast be an online business is, again, you're recording one episode per week, or maybe like me on a bi-weekly basis. So these podcast episodes, even though I released them 6 months ago, they're still working for me. People are still listening. People are downloading the podcast SEO workbook. People are scheduling one-on-one calls with me. So it's always working, constantly working on the back end for you. It does the heavy lifting for you. Podcasting is a very intimate way that you can build trust with people because, again, you are in people's ears. You are literally talking to your audience directly. And you're talking to them on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. You are being consistent and they are building that trust with you slowly. Now, I will say that like building your podcast and building your online business with a podcast, it is a slow grind because you can't go viral with a podcast. Like you don't, that doesn't exist. So I do want you to keep in mind that it is a slow grind, but once the momentum gets going, it is so worth it. It's like the snowball effect, right? It takes time to build that snowball, but once it gets going on its own, it has its own momentum, there's no stopping that snowball. Your podcast positions you as the expert. So again, that consistency, that providing your experience, your client wins, those testimonials, all of that helps your audience gain trust and positions you as the expert. So for example, I've had opportunities to speak about immigration because of my immigration podcast. So I am literally collecting data with all these stories that I am listening to and the processes and things like that. Like, no, I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't give legal advice, but I am in this immigration space. I am keeping up with what is going on. So I remember somebody told me, they were like, you have to stop downplaying how much you know about immigration because from the average person, you are an expert. And yeah, because again, I used to say like, or same thing, like I'm not an immigration attorney. I can't, give legal advice and things like that. But then they told me like, but from the average person, you know more because it's not a topic that a lot of people talk about or are involved in unless, again, they themselves are going through an immigration process or they know a family member or something like that. So podcasting positions you as the expert in your field and in your business. So one of the biggest things with having your podcast as an online business is knowing who you're talking to because you're not going to be talking to everyone, right? This is step one of the voice method is like, what is the vision of your podcast and who are you going to be talking to? Because again, your podcast is not for everyone and you don't want it to be for everyone. So this podcast name is called Podcasting for Latina CEOs. So I am talking to Latinas who want to start their podcast and want to start an online business with a podcast. And that is who I'm talking to. That is who my target audience is. That is who I am trying to help. So be clear on who you're talking to and what are you helping them with? What is it that they are struggling with that you can help them overcome? What is their end goal that you can help and lead them to? That is what's really going to make your podcast stand out from other podcasts and what's really going to make your podcast a strong lead generator for your online business. So here are a few things that podcasters get wrong in regards to not being able to make their podcast be a lead generator for their business. They record without a goal. So what is the goal for each episode? What are you trying to get people to do at the end of the episode? You need to mention your offers. Do not be afraid to tell people how you can help them with their problem, or what is the problem that they have and how you can actually help them. Podcasters sometimes feel weird about talking about their prices or their business, but if you don't talk about your business, how do people know that you have a business? How are you going to get clients if you don't talk about it? And another thing is that they think that you need a big audience to be able to start a podcast. And actually, no. So one of the biggest misconception is that like you need to have like 1,000 downloads per episode to be able to like have a successful podcast. But I always say, like, think of it like this. Let's say you release one episode and you get 10 downloads. So 10 people listen to that one episode. And one person reaches out and said, hey, this resonated with me. Thank you for sharing that. Would you say that that podcast episode was a success, or would you say it's not? Another mindset framework type of thing is same episode, you release it, right? 10 people listen to it and you gain one client from that episode. Was that episode a success or was it not? So don't worry about how many downloads that you're getting per episode, especially in the very beginning, because in the very beginning, you're trying to get your feet wet, you're trying to get the ball rolling, you're trying to get momentum. You should think the main focus in the very beginning should be consistency and providing good content for your audience. That is what your main goal, at least for the first year and a half, right? After that, then we can talk about growth and things like that. But that is really what your main focus should be. And if you are getting one client per episode and that episode is only getting 10 downloads, are you being like, are you not reaching your goal? Like, of course, we want more clients, but we have to start at 1, right? You have to start at 1 to be able to get to 10, to 25, to 50, right? So you don't need a huge audience when it comes to podcasting to be able to reach your goals. All right. So this is also a mindset shift that podcasters have to do, or when you start your podcast that you have to think about, right? Your podcast doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. You just need to be authentic. You just need to be yourself. It needs to be intentional. What do you want to help people with, and what do you want them to do after they listen to your episode? Small and engaged audience is always better than a large disconnected audience. Your podcast will grow with you, and you don't have to do everything at once. Your podcast will grow with you. That is so deep and so true, especially with how much I have grown in this podcasting journey. Because, they say that entrepreneurship is like the biggest self-development journey that you can go on. And honestly, like with doing my podcast, it's just like having a business. It's like I had to overcome fear. I had to overcome doubt. I had to overcome being comfortable with using my voice. I had to overcome imposter syndrome. I had to overcome like, who am I that I am sharing immigrant stories, or that I am helping other people launch their podcasts. But as time went on and I've got more comfortable with it, and, I got recognition, and it's like, okay, I see you, God. I see why you have me here. So all those doubts of like, who am I? What am I doing? All of those I had to overcome within these last 4 years that I have been doing this podcasting journey, which again are the same things that I hear entrepreneurs having to go through themselves. And then also when it comes to podcasting, like you have to create the content just like when you do with your online business. And then you have to plan it out. You have to, record it. You have to edit, and then you have to market, right? You have to know how to market your podcast, just like you have to know how to market your online business. So these are the same parallels, right, that online businesses and podcasting have, which is why, again, I say that having a podcast is like having an online business, or it is having an online business. And I remember last year when I went to this conference, there was an attorney there. She's a trademark attorney. And we were talking about her job and about me podcasting. And then she was like, when I do trademarks for podcasters, I pretty much go through the same steps that I would as business owners. So like podcasting is like having a business. And I was like, I am so glad you said that. Because yes, like it truly, truly is. There's a lot of work that goes in behind podcasting, and there's a lot of work that goes into having an online business. So if you are looking to start an online business and you have been thinking about starting a podcast, do it. start your podcast, start your online business. I am here to help you. You do not have to do this alone. Again, I created the voice method for you. It's a step-by-step guide for you to start your podcast, and it will help you set it up with systems put in place from the very beginning to make sure that you are generating leads, to make sure that you are marketing correctly, to make sure that is structured and organized from the very beginning to help you with long-term success in your podcast. So, if you are looking to start your podcast, you can go to the links in the show notes. There is one-on-one podcast strategy launch with me. There is the voice method podcast launch course, which you can do on your own pace. It is 6 weeks, or again, you can do it on your own pace, so you can do it in 6 weeks or less. Or there is the voice method podcast launch workbook, which is a PDF file that literally walks you through step by step on how to launch your podcast. And I actually just got a review back from a client who downloaded the workbook or bought the workbook. And this is what she said. She said, after following Heidy for years, I finally decided to take the leap and explore starting my own podcast. I was overwhelmed by the idea of it, but the voice method podcast launch workbook made it so incredibly easy. She walks you through every step of the process, including finding a hosting site and advertising your new show. My show is up and running and I'm having so much fun with it. Thanks to Heidy and the voice method. So there you go. It works, you guys. I was very, very intentional with making sure that the steps were easy to follow, that it was not overwhelming, and that you will have systems set in place for your podcast to be a success, no matter what that goal is for you, okay? So once again, if you're looking to start your online business and you're looking to start a podcast, I want to help you, okay? The links are in the show notes and show description. There's one-on-one podcast strategy launch with me. There is the voice method workbook, and then there is the voice method podcast course. All right, all those links are in the show notes and show description. And next episode, I will share all the opportunities that this podcast, well, actually not this podcast, my first podcast, but because of my first podcast, I started this podcast. But the next episode is all the opportunities that I have that has been presented to me because I started my podcast. All right. Thank you once again for being here. Again, I am Heidy de la Cruz. I am your host and your coach in this podcasting journey. And thank you again. Thank you. Con mucho amor. Bye.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.